Let me take you back to the mid-80s. Toys are flying off the shelves and onto the airwaves. Whether because of the FCC rolling back regulations on advertising in children's television, or a scramble within the toy industry to create the next big multimedia franchise after the success of Kenner's Star Wars action figures, cartoons based on toy franchises dominated kids' programming for a brief while. He-Man, Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, Transformers, My Little Pony, Care Bears, Jem and the Holograms, Rubik the Amazing Cube, Brave Star. Of course, a lot of people pointed out how these were pretty much just 22-minute toy commercials, but those people are long gone now and we're on the 8th Transformers movie? The strategy clearly worked to put these into the minds of children, and Hasbro was the king of this with probably the widest range of successes between all their now iconic franchises. While this was going on, in 1985, the Discovery Channel first began airing. These guys weren't shilling toys, they were shilling knowledge. The Discovery Channel focused on mainly educational documentaries, most of which had never been seen in the US and were acquired from other English-speaking countries. There's even a brief period where they aired a bit of Soviet television in 1987. In 1988, they introduced Shark Week, which became a staple for the channel, and only had positive effects on our relationship with nature. Discovery rose in popularity and was on track to pretty much becoming a whole media empire. In 1996, Discovery introduced several spin-off channels, including Animal Planet, the Science Channel, the Learning Channel, also known as TLC, and Discovery Kids. Discovery Kids aimed younger, with educational programs for kids aged 2 to 17. Aside from kid-friendly documentaries, the network would branch out into fictional programs like Flight 29 Down, Scout Safari, and Darcy's Wild Life, the latter of which was lost media up until about last year. Going into the 2000s, they had the budget to do their own animated shows. A lot of people out there have fond memories of Kenny the Shark, Tuttenstein, Peep in the Big Wide World, Time Warp Trio, Growing Up Creepy. All my Peep in the Big Wide World stands, sound off in the comments. There were also several international versions of Discovery Kids in Latin America, Australia, India, Middle East, North Africa. Their branding was even so strong that Discovery used it to sell toys. Kiddie science kits and other educational toys bearing the Discovery Kids Globe logo were sold, and several Discovery stores popped up in malls across the US. Making a retail chain out of a TV channel might sound crazy, but back then it was a novel concept that a lot of big media companies were doing. And if anything, was a testament to how popular any given network or brand had become. Warner Brothers Studio Store, the Hanna-Barbera store, go to any airport and you'll see an NBC branded convenience store. And don't get me started on the Food Network kitchen. That's where they sent Paula Deen to work after the incident. I say all this, but Discovery Kids wasn't the biggest thing in the world. It was barely hitting the numbers compared to the three big kids cable channels, and a certain CEO saw a hole that could be filled in not only the kids' TV space, but in their wallets. That's when it was decided that Discovery Kids would have to rebrand. Discovery Kids had been a network that parents trusted, something that was appropriate for kids with educational content and shows they could sit down and view together as a family. The last thing was the niche they were aiming to go for with the rebrand. Discovery brought on Margaret Loesch, a name you might not recognize if you're normal, but is someone who has an impressive resume with kids TV, being the main producer behind Fox Kids, one of the most powerful children's television institutions of the late 80s and early 90s. She reinforced the idea of a more family-oriented network in the age where salacious and cynical programs like Hannah Montana were corrupting the minds of the youth. Yeah, remember when parents thought Hannah Montana was edgy? I mean, before Miley Cyrus did whatever she did to make people mad, I don't know. They were targeting 6 to 11s, is what I got out of my research. At the time, it makes sense, because back then there wasn't really that much on TV for that demographic, mostly preschool shows and yeah, slightly more edgy tween sitcoms. So, a noble pursuit, if not one to make a few extra bucks. Another big ingredient in this was Hasbro, who owned a 50% stake in the network. They might have been free from the controversies of teen pop stars, but having a toy company as your partner for this venture raised a few eyebrows. This was not the 80s anymore, and people didn't take kindly to 22-minute toy commercials around these here parts. Parents groups were outraged, and animation news website Cartoon Brew referred to the new set of programming as the cruel end of creator-driven animation. So they had a lot of people to prove wrong. What did they do? The new channel had to have a theme of unity, or coming together. As I said, they were aiming for certain ages, but still wanted to emphasize the family aspect of the channel. It was meant to be a hub where all ages could gather. It's called The Hub. The Hub name was simple and effective. The network's logo and branding upon launch were designed by the Troika advertising and design firm. Early design exploration shows a lot of different ideas, most of which look really bad, outdated even by 2009, or just creatively bankrupt. The final logo design was something simple, a silver circle with 2 points added to make it, a little dynamic, plus the channel name with a new font. This is the Hubble, a malleable entity that can fly around and transform into whatever, meant to represent the varying types of programming. The Hubble would also have a smaller companion named Bub, both of which would appear together in the channel's preschool block, Hubbub. There's a distinct look that this early branding has. The CG was probably really expensive for the time, with this thing transforming, flying around, and that Pixar fur looking grass. I'd say besides that part of it, these bumpers really hold up today. Not in terms of modern design trends, just the CG. The network was propped up to launch on October 10th, 2010, or as it was referred to in marketing, 10-10-10. Yeah. This was the beginning of something new. New decade, new network, new shows. The Hub broadcasted on the morning of, ending Discovery Kids for good in the United States. The final program broadcast was an episode of Kenny the Shark, before viewers were officially welcomed to the new channel. The first show broadcast on the Hub was...
Who?
Stop it. He's only a child.
This is freaking me out. Yeah, the right to have the acronym be TW, I'm gonna need a trigger warning for this. Based on the greeting cards of the same name, the Twisted Whiskers Show was a series of CGI Looney Tunes style shorts that followed various animal characters. There's not much to say in the way of content. Whose idea was this, to make a show out of these insanely creepy greeting card characters? There are CGI Twisted Whiskers shorts going back further to like 2006, so apparently American Greetings has been cooking this one up for a while. Why didn't they just start making more greeting card TV shows? I mean, it worked for Care Bears, worked for Rainbow Bright, come on, where's the Maxine and Floyd show? Besides that, the Hub had around 10 other original shows ready to go in the beginning, a few preschool shows, as well as the more well-known staples of the network. On the Hasbro side, we have shows like Family Game Night, a show based around their board game properties. From what I watched, it looked like a lot of fun. If there's one thing I love in any piece of media, it's live-action set design, and this goes crazy with it. Apparently, this was actually proposed by Margaret, and not by the Hasbro execs, which is odd because out of any shows that scream corporate synergy, this is the one. The game had two families competing in these giant Hasbro-themed challenges to win real-life prizes. It was hosted by Todd Newton, and reportedly ran for 5 whole seasons. I can imagine this doing really well on a more mainstream network. At least in my experience, game shows are the best things to watch with family, and this has enough high energy and crazy elements, enough IPs, that it would keep everyone interested. Compared to most game shows like Jeopardy, Snore, we've got Yahtzee Bowling, how about that? Several other board game TV shows would be produced over the years. The Game of Life got an adaptation, wherein families would ride in a virtual car and spin a big wheel. Scrabble Showdown was a spelling-based show with Scrabble branding. There was an original Scrabble game show from like the 80s based more on the game, but this one gotta be fun for the kids. Everyone's favorite Hasbro game, Picturica, got an adaptation, wherein teams of kids, along with their parents, compete in various challenges. Seeing a theme here? The Picturica branding here, I will admit, is really fun. The illustrations give it a lot of charm, and they even had an animated intro. In-house music was performed by George Gabriel, also known as G, and purportedly the intro theme was done by the Aquabats of all people. But I don't trust any fandom wiki site, so let's look up the intro just to be sure. I don't know, it doesn't sound like the Aquabats to me. Clue never got a game show, but was incorporated into a YA miniseries about kids who solve a mystery. This thing feels like a joke somebody would come up with. A Clue reboot with hip teens who wear loosely color-coded outfits in a show where nobody actually gets off. They even have nicknames for each other from the game like, "Whoa, watch out, Colonel Mustard." There's this secret society and something about Nikola Tesla. You don't get too attached to the characters, and as a result, it isn't an interesting watch. I'll stick to Clue 1985 starring Tim Curry, thank you very much. And I don't even think that one's too great. The ending where Mrs. Peacock was behind everything is the correct one. I should also mention Hub World, a magazine-type show that ran briefly from 2011 to 2012. Hosted by a Christmas elf, the show focuses on current entertainment news, as well as goings-on with other Hub TV programs. The first episode I tracked down opens with a spotlight on the Justin Bieber documentary, so you know when this was coming out. I should also mention that Taylor Swift had her own miniseries on here, some sort of documentary about her Fearless tour. Unfortunately, they didn't have her interact with any cartoon characters.
Oh my goodness, Twilight. That looks like a Cutie Mark catastrophe.
Catastrophe is right! I've never seen anything like this before!
2 Transformers cartoons aimed at different demographics premiered on here, Transformers Prime in the beginning of the Hub's life, which was a new take on the characters from the writers of the second live-action movie. All the standards are back, Optimus, Bumblebee, Megatron, all those, and even some new characters. I don't really see the appeal of Transformers as a franchise, and I wouldn't have time to watch enough material to give a satisfactory review of the show, so keeping in the theme of our robotic heroes and villains, I got a robot to write a review for me. As someone who isn't a fan of the Transformers franchise, I was pleasantly surprised by Transformers Prime. The show has impressive animation, engaging characters, and a well-crafted storyline that doesn't rely too heavily on prior knowledge of the franchise. The voice acting is also top-notch, adding depth to the characters and their relationships. While the sci-fi elements may not be my cup of tea, I can still appreciate the show for its production value and storytelling. Overall, Transformers Prime is a surprisingly enjoyable watch, even for non-fans of the franchise.
Or something like that.
Transformers Rescue Bots was a preschool show featuring a new cast of characters, saving the day in everyday situations. It's kind of like Transformers meets Paw Patrol. I think I actually watched a bit of this on Netflix when I was really young. I remember the helicopter one being the silly one, and them having to take care of a baby, I think, and them name-dropping Optimus Prime in the intro, because, you know, he's not going to be here for this. As a Zoomer, I think a lot of these 80s toy brands just haven't been able to connect with my generation too much. I know people who like Transformers, but personally, I just have this issue relating to it. I can't take the robots seriously, I'm sorry. Strawberry Shortcake's Very Bitty Adventures was another toy show that came on day one. I am not watching 4 seasons of Strawberry Shortcake. I didn't go into Transformers, so I think it's only fair that I do a brief overview. I know it sounds hypocritical knowing what I talk about on this channel, but what do you want me to say? The show is nice and cozy and good for this kind of thing. I kinda got like Winnie the Pooh vibes from it. They're just in their little strawberry world hanging out. The theme song is really good though, and a lot of these voice actors actually sound similar. Kind of like
My Little Pony, My Little...
My Little Pony premiered the day of the Hub, and to say it was their biggest show would be an understatement. The series ditches a lot of the tropes that the previous MLP shows fall into for something that all ages could get behind. It had cute, colorful ponies making friends, singing songs, and baking cupcakes, yeah, but it was more silly and cartoony with some fantasy storytelling thrown in. Lauren Faust was brought on, who had an impressive track record with work on a lot of Cartoon Network shows. For what it was, it had great humor, songs, art direction. I've talked enough about My Little Pony on this channel, you guys get it, but I will say that out of most shows that the network aired, this one seems relatively safe. A cartoon from an established industry voice based on one of Hasbro's most popular brands, even if it didn't bring people to the network, which it did, don't get me wrong, it would at least pay for itself in like DVD sales. But what do I know? Hasbro's cash horse couldn't be stopped. By around 2012, they had ponies, Care Bears, Strawberry Shortcake, and soon... This is a segue into Littlest Pet Shop, buddy. Come on, try and keep up. Littlest Pet Shop premiered in November 2012, based on the toy line of the same name. It stars Blythe Baxter, a girl who has the uncanny ability to talk to animals. The show follows her daily adventures of hanging out with the pets at the titular pet shop, while chasing her dreams of becoming a fashion designer. The amount of DNA that this show shares with MLP is wild, and probably isn't a coincidence. A lot of the same writers, voice actors, music done by the same people. Both shows even have cold openings in each episode. Maybe they were trying to have another MLP, huh?
Suspicious.
There are a lot of things that set this show apart, thankfully. The pet characters are different enough from the dynamic of the main 6 ponies. There's a few boy ones here instead of all girls, and there's 7 instead of 6. They do have the diva and the excitable pink one, which is pretty shameless, but the others have their own thing. Compared to MLP, they aren't as distinct individually, especially with all the human characters, which we haven't factored in yet. They try to give them all their own little talent, but it doesn't matter in each episode, aside from maybe Zoe's modeling or Vinny's dancing. dancing. It just reminds me of whenever they have to do a big ceremony or whatever in MLP, and they gotta have Applejack baking, Pinkie Pie making balloons, Rarity hanging up ribbons or something, and Fluttershy with that bird chorus every time. It's that kind of thing. It's just what they do, I guess. But in MLP, at least it has something to do with their personality or whatever. I don't get why they had to introduce Sunil the Mongoose as a wannabe magician when his main character trait is being scared of everything. Like, look, what do those two have in common? Within the show, I don't want any essays in the comment section about symbolism. Maybe that was just my expectation from the song in the opening two-parter, which introduces us to all the pets, and it's rough. The music in the show can be really good, but I was not feeling that first one. Catchy, but if somebody walked in on me listening to We're the Littlest Pet Shop Pets, I think I'd have to flee the country. The art style I thought had some charm to it, very angular with a lot of bright desaturated pastels in these backgrounds. It makes the characters stick out a lot, which I appreciate. It's very clearly a real-life setting, but it's got a nice bubblegum pop flair to it. The offline art is also a neat touch. All the characters in line with the toys have these gigantic detailed eyes. I can see those putting people off. On the pet characters, I think it looks cute, but some of the humans are a little too doll-ish. I think some of the inspiration had to come from not only the Pet Shop toy line, but the Blythe dolls themselves, which are based on some Japanese doll from the 70s that Hasbro shoved into the LPS line so that collectors could use it to make customs.
Loose, I'm free.
The pets all look cute. These came out with the later versions of the toys, which were more cartoony, angular with these over-the-top colors, and had way more species than just dogs and cats. I know a lot of people prefer the original from 2007, but I see why they went for this for the cartoon. Penny Ling, the panda, is the closest to what people picture when they think LPS. I like how some of these characters have these giant eyes and tiny mouths, so that whenever they're standing around they just look like the TBH creature. I don't like how Vinny has ears for some reason, and I was not a fan of Minka's design going in, but her pigtails kind of grew on me. A surprising amount of them stand on their hind legs, which I guess lets them get more expressive. The animation, I will say, is on the higher end of what they had on this network. Pretty much all of the original series were made using puppet rigs, and this one either looks like they had a really efficient art style or just a higher budget. I'm leaning towards that second one, the biggest smoking gun for that probably being Blythe's different hair and outfits in each episode. The characters are expressive, they move fine enough, pretty fast paced, which I can appreciate. There are a lot of fun musical sequences and fantasies where the pets all have these different outfits. And speaking of music, I didn't watch every episode, so maybe I didn't get the best songs, but the originals in the show were pretty good. I can imagine these altering my brain chemistry if I listened to them as a kid. The Guilty Tango from season 3 I think was fun. The one where the rich mongoose sings about how rich he is. The song about kung fu quilting sung by... oh. Haha, X-person who did something for a cartoon also got caught doing horrible IRL things. Alright, buddy. I'm only doing one of those, and it's gonna be for the Aquabats review, so let's move on. Dance Like You Know You Can? Absolute banger. I'd compare it to Phineas and Ferb, where most episodes have a song, so it's not too special when it happens. A lot of the ones in LPS are pop songs, unsurprisingly. Thankfully, this was long enough ago so that they sound more endearing instead of dated. And trust me, there's some dated stuff in here, like the parodies of Toddlers and Tiaras, or Shark Tank, remember Shark Tank? Or how about the viral video episode that every kids cartoon from 2012 had to do? Well, it's not really a viral video, but it's the same thing, where they feel the need to explain what memes are to the kiddies, and they use the word hits to mean views, which is so 2012. I can't believe the cutoff for doing plots like this in cartoons was, 2018, with Wreck-It Ralph 2? Sunil is a worthless bum, alone on a pile of bricks. Blythe, as a character, is just girl who likes fashion. They make her likable, though. She's clearly meant to be some sort of role model for the kids watching. She wants to do what's right, stay out of trouble, eats her vegetables, all that. She has the same voice actress, so her voice dips into sounding like Rainbow Dash, or even Applejack during the Toddlers and Tiaras episode. A lot of the other characters, I had to deduce who they were. The lizard is Snails from MLP, Buttercream the bunny is Cozy Glow, Monkey is Diamond Tiara, the two mean girls have the same singing voice as Pinkie Pie, so that was distracting. The other human characters do what they need to do. Blythe's friends are her friends, her dad and the shop owner are just quirky adults who act as authority figures and give some comic relief, and the two Biscuit twins are the villains in most stories that have them. I like that they're able to have a few different stories going on in some of the episodes, between with what the pets are getting up to and Blythe and the other humans. It makes things feel pretty fast within 22 minutes, and gives you some variety in the stories they're able to do. Sometimes the pets will have their own B-plot, sometimes they're with Blythe, sometimes it's something different. There are other recurring pet characters, but I really think it's about these guys. These ever so marketable dessert pets show up sometimes. I'm not sure what they were going for with them. All I'll say is that the cat is playing for the green team and this bunny's got flower power on her side. Overall, Littlest Pet Shop is a fun time. Again, it's probably aping on My Little Pony, but if you like My Little Pony, you'll probably like this. It's more stereotypically girly, pretty sure the whole fashion thing was just added for extra girl appeal. The songs in every episode, real world setting, and all the cliches that come with that, make it feel a little more generic and kiddie, but there's still some of that charm. It's My Little Pony mixed with Disney Channel mixed with Rugrats. I don't know, we all know what the true LPS TV show is.
Let's face it, Brooke. Your problem is that you're 100% peanut butter and jealous of me.
Now, it's great, but if it's too ponyish or girly for you, don't worry. Think of the LPS cartoon as the middle of a spectrum. On one end is My Little Pony, and on the other is Pound Puppies. Pound Puppies is technically a toy franchise, but this cartoon can really be seen separately. Anyways, Pound Puppies started out in the mid-80s as a series of plushes sold by Tonka before they were absorbed into Hasbro. I'll let Doug Walker describe them to you.
Their marketing gimmick was far too clever to overlook. Buy one of our cute, sad little puppies or else they get the gas.
Yeah. There was an original cartoon produced by Hanna-Barbera that had a group of puppies working inside the pound, trying to find homes for the dogs who were sent there. There are a few things besides that were translated into the reboot, but they really went in a new direction with it. And you know what? That was probably for the best because I nearly fell in love with Pound Puppies 2010. There's not much info about the behind the scenes of this show that I could find. 2 of the 3 creators were also the creators of Recess, and if the IMDb trivia section didn't tell you that, then the intro sure will. I get that they're both based on The Great Escape, but come on, this is a little shameless. The show focuses on this group of dogs at this pound who try to find homes for the other dogs that are sent there, but this time around they have their own worldwide secret society of dogs and they use high-tech computers and have this lair under the pound. Yeah, your suspension of disbelief for this show needs to be really high. The dogs also do so much crazy stuff in this. They build this whole mechanism on the side of the pound in broad daylight. They also can all secretly talk to humans, and there's an episode where one of them accidentally gets caught, and they have to make people think it's fake. Also, that's the viral video episode, because, you know, you gotta have that. Even though it came out a year before the Littlest Pet Shop episode with the meme, it somehow feels less dated. I don't know. I guess maybe it feels more timeless because it's a story that could happen even without the internet. Just them taking a video of a dog singing, they could do that in the 90s, they had camcorders. And because it's not an image macro meme with the impact font, and they don't have that scene where they explain where likes are, they still call it hits instead of views, which, like, come on, what is this? The finding a home part makes you root for our heroes by default, and gives the show this overall sweetness to it. That means they can be as mean as they want to this guy. From the first few episodes, I thought Mr. McLeish was going to be a bigger focus. Like most episodes would involve him or give him some sort of B-story, but there are a lot I saw where he's not that relevant. It's kind of a shame. I really liked his shtick of trying to get some sort of ego boost every episode, getting in with the city council, being famous online, dealing with mommy issues. You know, he's a real character. In fact, in the episodes without him as the villain, or the victim, the show comes off as too sweet. Like, there's this one where they have to do a dog show, and the thing turns into this lady being all strict with her puppy when, you know, they used to have fun together. Like, that's the conflict. What is this? Strawberry Shortcake's Berry Bitty Adventures? I also like Olaf. He and McLeish play off each other really nicely. McLeish also probably has way more dimension than the villain from the Hanna-Barbera version ever did. I mean, you know, this guy disagrees. The villains in the original are what made it fun. Now it's boring and stupid. Mr. McLeish is a negative influence, and he mistreats his assistant. Niblet is also annoying. Squirt and Cookie are jerks. Lucky is not cooler. And the only good character is Strudel. You know, ain't that the truth? The main group of dogs functions good as a character unit. Lucky is the leader who's chill, he's got a plan for everything. Cookie is the strong one with a soft side. Niblet and Squirt are like this Timon and Pumbaa duo. I'm only saying that because one of the episodes I watched was this Halloween special where the two of them are getting chased around the museum. It was really fun. Strudel is also here, and she's the best. I don't know, I just like her. She's the nerd, but she's not like the pizza plus friends equals fun type character. She actually has social skills and kind of has this arrogance to her, which is a really nice quirk. All the other characters' default expressions have eyebrows, but she's just got these big bug eyes whenever you see her. Also, it's kind of a treat whenever she shows up in an episode, because she never really gets to go on any of the big adventures. Just watched a few more after drafting the script, and there's actually one that's all about that. Not sure about her voice though, they're trying for some sort of accent. I don't know if it's supposed to be a posh American accent, but there's some German in there. Overall though, besides a few quirks, the voice acting in the show is surprisingly good. Like, I don't really notice voice acting unless it's bad or doesn't fit the character, but here I think it actually elevates the animation. Lucky's voice actor does a great job. McLeish, of course. Rebound, this weirdo who shows up. She has a nice voice, the kind of thing you wouldn't expect from this kind of hyperactive character. Niblet is played by John DiMaggio, aka Bender from Futurama. Every time he talks, you can picture him hamming it up in the booth. Like, it's not an amazing performance, but it's one of those where you can hear him straining on each word.
What time is it? Time for you to shut up!
There were actually a few cool guest stars they got for this. Nothing groundbreaking for an animated show, but Betty White shows up a lot as McLeish's mom. George Takei has a few appearances. Clancy Brown is in an episode doing pretty much the Mr. Krabs voice. A lot of other well-known voice actors have additional roles. E.G. Daily, Tara Strong, Grey DeLisle. I think Cree Summer is great, but here she plays one of the worst characters, this puppy who hangs around Cookie. This design just isn't cute enough to make the voice work. It's too generic to be a main character too, like look at Rebound. The show tries to have their own Cutie Mark Crusaders with these 3 puppies who hang around and have their own secret club, but these are not the CMCs, dude. You are not the guy.
You are not the guy. You're not capable of being the guy.
I like Rebound, but what could you tell me about Cupcake or other guy? Nothing. And they're just there to be all wide-eyed and get into trouble so that the adults can come and save them. If anything, it makes me appreciate MLP, because at least the kid characters in that could hold a story on their own. The show actually had a lot of opportunities to be obnoxious, and I feel like the Pup Club is the one thing out of all the places you could have tripped up that they managed to get wrong. Like, a show about dogs and little kids, and with the character archetypes they had, could have been really generic and hard to watch. Like, I was expecting to not like Niblet at all, but no, they know how to use him. Even though he's just lol XD big dumb guy. It's nice, it's just a nice show. The animation, I will say, starts out pretty rough. These early episodes look like someone's college project. The characters move really stiff, which has some charm, but it's not too nice to look at when you can literally see the pixels on the backgrounds. Starting from episode 7 onwards, the show would be animated by DHX, who did MLP and Littlest Pet Shop. It's obviously better animated, but I'm not sure how I feel about the characters suddenly having line art. I really like these early designs. You know, forget Blue Shirt Bart. Let me put you on to Yellow Shirt McLeish. Either way, a lot of the humans reminded me of Go Anime characters. Pound Puppies overall is a hidden gem. Not groundbreaking, but I think it gets overlooked when talking about the Hub Network originals. Compared to LPS, I'd say that was more of a kid thing, while this is something more for families to watch together, which is what they wanted, those sick freaks. I think that's pretty much all the Hasbro shows. I think they did stick true to their word, not having 22-minute toy commercials exactly. I mean, that's what some of these were, but they could be watched without that, and were generally fun cartoons. Plus, they really made up less than half of the Hub's library. But what about that other half, huh? Majors and Minors was a show that debuted in 2011. It was a reality show about a bunch of kids who try and compete for a record deal with Sony Music. Neat enough. There was also Cosmic Quantum Ray, which was from day one. The show that feels like a holdover from Discovery Kids, and it was, so I'm not going to talk about it here. The 99, this show based on Middle Eastern culture, that never aired due to controversy, which is kind of sad because looking up stuff about the creator, they really wanted to have good representation for kids. Nah, we gotta air The Haunting Hour instead. The Haunting Hour is based on a book and movie by the same name by R.L. Stine. Purportedly, it was originally going to be tied into the movie, but it was decided to just make it like Goosebumps and have a standalone anthology. Guess they don't want people to think about the movie. There were 4 whole seasons of this, so I gotta say it was one of the more popular shows, surprisingly. The first episode sets the precedent for the series. This story about a girl getting one of those twin dolls, but it slowly starts possessing her and messing up her family life. I like how there's a Red Letter Media video where they joke about this exact thing happening.
Is this like a horror movie? Does the doll slowly just suck away your soul? It like leeches your humanity away from you, and eventually the child becomes like the doll?
It started out surprisingly serious. I like the family drama part of it, even though it had a little cheese to it, but that second half where the doll becomes a puppet and it gets run over, and they go to the doll factory and they've got Robert Smith working down there. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff I'd expect from the Goosebumps guy. They do a good job at setting up a genuinely pretty good atmosphere in most episodes, but it has enough cheese for people who want that sort of thing. It's a more serious Goosebumps. Goosebumps for the Twilight generation. edition, if you will. If you're looking for a horror anthology series with that specific brand of 2010s YA cheese, then sure, check this one out if you can. Because while a lot of the episodes are available on YouTube, the only other place to watch, officially, is on Tubi. In Spanish. Yeah, there's no official English release on streaming if you don't want to buy it. Is it a rights thing, or did they just not want to put it out on here? Similar in genre, we have Spooksville, a show about a kid moving to a new town, where things aren't what they seem. It's one of those. Like the Clue series, I get that there would be an audience for it, but it reminds me of something like House of Anubis on Nickelodeon. Like the show that's too boring for kids and too kiddie for the people who actually want something like a dark academia mystery. The kid with the glasses looks way too much like my brother too, so, you know.
We'll be right back after these messages.
Adventure ponies.
Yeah! Hey, it's me!
Dragon trouble.
Mini Pants, take that!
Applejack smack.
Yeah!
Oh no, a Hydra.
Whoopsie whoopsie!
Rainbow dash. Uh-oh, it's Discord. Elements of harmony unite. You win. My Little Pony. Saturdays, only on the Hub. It could happen.
And now, back to our show on the Hub.
So cartoons that weren't driven by a Hasbro toy. While the toy cartoons might have been inherently controversial, with backlash from parent organizations worried about the effects of advertising, the original animated series had to at least be welcomed by the media at the time. It's Shizao, isn't it? It's gonna be Shizao.
Alright, Jagoff.
Shizao follows Guy, that's his name, a kid who gets a ring that can give him superpowers. The problem is that the ring belonged to a female superhero, so now he's, quote, gotta save the world dressed like a girl. With an already dated premise, Shizao doesn't have too many high heels to stand on. Aside from the main thing, which wasn't really as uncomfortable as I thought it was going to be, this felt to me like the poor man's Johnny Test. Like, this premise could have been one episode of Johnny Test. And besides that, you got the rambunctious brother, the uptight sister, a secret spot in their house with a computer, bunch of random superhero stuff, really cringy jokes. I will say that it did make me kind of nostalgic for superhero shows from that time. Your Danny Phantom, Powerpuff, etc. What am I saying? Danny Phantom was 2004, and this is like, what, 2011? The dynamic is interesting, the brother being the one who's the superhero, and the sister being a nerd who knows all the lore. The nature of the secret identity also adds a new angle to it, but from the episodes I watched, the girl stuff is barely a focus. It's only used for a few gags and the million billion puns with the word she. In my research, I found a ton of articles about how the show is either a triumph for representation, or is this horrible indoctrination meant to confuse kids and poison the minds of this generation. Nobody past 2013 even acknowledged the show in the mainstream, so maybe it didn't do either, people. It started out as a pilot on Disney Channel of all places. You know, I thought this was news to me, and then I realized it was on Shorty McShortshorts Shorts. You know, it's a shame there's only one video that talks about the show, and it's by...
I'm out!
The show is a time capsule in and of itself. All the shorts radiate that specific era of art, including the intro, yum yum, gimme some. The Fabulizers, Mascot Prep, Too Many Robots, talk about eye candy. The Shizao pilot here looks a lot better than the actual show, probably due to it being a one-off, as well as that Disney budget. The characters have these Kermit the Frog noodle limbs that just swing around, and it's much more expressive than the final art style. Plus the backgrounds and character designs just look a lot better. Might be off-putting, but looking at this makes the final show look a lot more generic. The final show has such a cheap feeling to it. It looks like cutscenes from a video game that's going to teach me how to type. I also think there was more to the pilot, with the sister character having a larger role, the best friend character having a crush on Shizao, and the way the powers turn on and off. Shizao has a unique coat of paint, but there are a lot of shows that go for similar things, and scratch that same comedic superhero itch. From what I saw, I felt like this was rushed out the door. They were planning a season 2, but with changes in the network, it was turned down. I think a Shizao season 2 might have worked, but only if they upped that animation budget. Dan Vs. is one of the most unusual shows the Hub ever aired. It was originally thought up by duo Dan Mandel and Chris Pearson, in the mid-2000s, and was going to be a live-action adult sitcom, the footage of which was lost media until now.
Did you get my Transformers Pride toy? What the? Is this some kind of sick joke?
got Soundwave.
Oh, come on!
Truly ahead of their time. After they found out Adult Swim was looking for pitches, they retooled it into an animated show and tried to get it picked up there. They were turned down and the concept was pitched pretty much everywhere else after. MTV, Fox, Nickelodeon, Disney XD. It winded up at Cartoon Network, but development ended up halting for around a year. Margaret Loesch, who was involved with this incarnation, brought the show over to the hub. The show stars Dan, who's always mad at the world and tries to get revenge for any given thing that the episode calls for. Dan versus the Wolfman, Dan versus art, Dan versus dancing, Dan versus Canada, Dan versus ye old Shakespeare dinner theater, etc. The show really focuses on three main characters: Dan, his friend Chris, and Chris's wife Elise. Chris always feels some sort of obligation to go along with Dan's plot, and Elise is a voice of reason, and is also a secret agent. They switch the main dynamic up a lot, but the usual formula is Dan does X crazy thing, Chris begrudgingly goes along, and Elise is trying to bring them both down to earth. The secret agent stuff comes in sometimes as this little B-plot, and I think it's funny how Elise does all this crazy stuff in the show, and the others barely question it. I also like the dynamic of the main three, because it's not something you see in most shows, adult or otherwise. You have this married couple, and then the main character who has no other friends. I don't know, it was interesting when most adult animated shows, at least the popular ones, are just about a family. Or if it's on Adult Swim and it's just random whatever. And I'm making comparisons here to adult cartoons because Dan vs. really blurs that line a lot. There's so much awful stuff that the characters go through and do to each other here. Plus, it's about grown-up characters dealing with grown-up problems.
I don't care who the IRS sends, I am not paying taxes.
I'm not sure this has too much appeal to kids, nor would parents be comfortable with their kids watching this. Well, the one thing it reminded me of was the Looney Tunes show, and I liked that as a kid, so I think this is kind of a family watch-together ordeal. I don't know, parents like to watch grown-up stuff with their kids, right? Most publications I found about the show boast the voice cast's previous work on stuff like Revenge of the Nerds, or being alumni of Kids in the Hall, or Family Ties, so maybe they were trying to get the parents invested. How do you even market a show like this? Well, you know who did like this? Bronies. Dan vs. was one of the only other shows on the hub that had any real adult appeal, so you saw a lot of weird crossover art of Dan and the MLP characters. Okay, maybe it was just the Flufflepuff guy who did it, but I remember these two shows being pretty intertwined. My theory is just because Bronies would watch MLP and catch Dan vs. right after. There was also some official material with them, but how about we save that for later. Dan as a character serves his purpose. They make him this over-the-top slob who has all these delusions on how the world is against him. Like, he is an angry, angry man with many a psychological issue. So many times, they'll bring up all the trouble he's gotten into off-screen. Like, there's this one episode where his identity gets stolen, and Chris and Elise think he's crazy, and act like it's just inevitable. Alright, here's my hot take. I would have liked to see how this show turned out if Dan were more of an everyman. Still delusional and angry, but not as much of a wreck as he is in this. I don't know, I get you gotta have exaggerated characters in a cartoon, but sometimes I had that problem where you know how they're gonna react in most situations, so it's not really surprising or funny. And this is coming from a person who thinks characters being awful to each other can be funny. It's not to an annoying degree though. Dan hatching these evil schemes against whatever is fun to watch. Chris works as a foil, well-meaning, but gets swept up in the madness. Like I said, they managed to switch it up enough times, so you don't just have every episode be, Chris, we're gonna do the thing. Oh, Dan, please, I don't know. They should hire me on Rick and Morty. I like how the two main characters are based on the creators, but one's negative traits way outbalance the others. Dan, as we've established, is this heinous individual, and Chris, you know, he liked the food. I actually think that part of Chris gives him a little charm. He and Elise have a nice relationship, even if now I realize it is just kind of a vaguely reskinned Homer and Marge type deal. You know, doofy husband and the wife who's on top of things. I didn't see it at first, but considering Chris's eating habits, it makes a lot of sense.
Suspicious.
Even if it is that kind of cliche, it's still clear that they love each other, and that's sweet to see. Again, saying things I brought up before, but compared to something like A Simpsons or Family Guy, seeing a younger couple in this kind of show is refreshing. The dialogue and situations that the characters get into is the main draw of the show. Each thing that Dan's trying to take down brings them to some new setting they can get jokes from. Even though there's a lot of great banter, sometimes they'll do these more surreal gags. I liked in the first episode where they're driving the car and they go into the guy's bedroom. I wish they did more like that. Because it's animated too, they're not afraid of doing more out there stuff. Dan vs. Traffic ends with a helicopter fight, and a chunk of episodes incorporate some sort of action sequence or sci-fi fantasy element, like with Elise's secret agent stuff. Animation works for that for sure. Better than what they were going to do with it in live action. You know, at least with what they have in the final product. But you know what, I love over-the-top zany live action stuff, so it could have been fun. Dan vs. was destined to become a cult classic. Arguably, it was out of place on the hub, but the way it is, I don't see it having an audience on any other channel at the time. It would have gotten buried on MTV, it doesn't stand out enough to be a primetime show they'd air on Fox or Comedy Central, feels too safe for Adult Swim. Apparently when it was at Cartoon Network they were getting buried in studio notes, so I doubt Nick or Disney XD would be too kind to it. Calling it now, in the universe where Dan vs. aired on Disney XD, Dan is a 10-year-old kid who rides a skateboard. There was some sort of mandate that every Disney XD show had to be about that. Draw fan art of that for me, please. At least on the hub, it reached a niche. The bronies were kind enough to it. Dan vs. was a fun watch. Thumbs up in my book. I'd say give Dan vs. a try if you want something like a Clone High or a Total Drama. I always associated it with that sort of niche. It really depends on if you like the characters or not, so just know that going into it. It's got a lot of fun banter, a lot of cool different episode concepts with the show's gimmick, but I gotta bring up the negatives before we leave. I know the pace or density of jokes per episode doesn't immediately make a show better, but I thought a few of the episodes I watched were too slow. Like, there are a lot more opportunities for fun moments that I don't think they took. What also doesn't help that is the animation. What I will say about the animation is I think they could have pushed it further. The article I found from one of the writers says something about them making each episode on crunch time, and with this animation, I'd believe that. Thankfully, the designs are stylized enough and the backgrounds have thought put into them, to the point where it doesn't look ugly or especially cheap. But it could have used more oomph. There are a lot of points where it looks really floaty and lethargic. I wish they could have had more expressions for these characters, and I wish that the movement was more expressive in general. Curtis Armstrong gives an amazing performance as Dan, to the point where the animation almost can't match the energy. Whenever Dan is yelling at someone, you want to see him squash and stretch, have really exaggerated posing, or at least move a little faster, but the animation doesn't let that happen. I'm not asking for it to be hyperactive Ren and Stimpy look at the funny face, but something with more energy. Even something snappy like a Clone High would have worked, or more like Total Drama, which was another more mature show airing on a kids network. Even Littlest Pet Shop has more energy to the movement, but we all know that's because of the Hasbro budget. 22-minute episodes, just the same basic tween animation. Watching stuff for this, I got so sick of seeing all these flash cartoons about characters running around in a generic city with these same music cues. All these shows' incidental music sounds exactly the same, like My Little Pony. It's putting me to sleep. I feel like I need something more stimulating. Whoa, 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 what's this, and that, and who are you, and what, and what, and what?
Who are you people?
The Aquabats were a ska band formed in 1994, known for their superhero personas and over-the-top stage performances, which would include monster costumes, full-on choreographed fights, fire breathing, and all kinds of crazy stunts. The band's zaniness had always been attractive to kids' TV, with Disney and Saban in the late 90s, and Cartoon Network later on, getting close to greenlighting an Aquabats TV show. The only reason most of those never happened was out of their control and due to studio executive changes. By the 2000s, the band's frontman Christian Jacobs had a considerable amount of clout in the kids' TV world after co-creating the TV show Yo Gabba Gabba. Yeah, seems weird, but Yo Gabba Gabba actually has a lot of Aquabats DNA in it. Anyways, the 2008 pilot that would have been developed at Cartoon Network was picked up by the Hub. Like Dan vs., this was a matter of Margaret Loesch, or her people, swooping in to give the show another chance. Well, what did they see in the supposed pilot?
The giant monster tortilla makes its way closer to the small village. It launches its toxic guacamole.
No, what did they see in it? Okay, say what you want about Dan vs. or The Haunting Hour or whatever, but the Aquabats pilot does not feel like it belongs on a kids' network. It focuses on the band as a traveling group of musical superheroes, and that's really it. There's a guy in a rubber monster costume and some campy effects, but I feel like they're playing it too straight here. The final show is really tongue-in-cheek and campy, but that original Tortilla Trouble pilot doesn't feel tongue-in-cheek. It feels like the tongue's way down in the throat, to the point where I can't understand what they're trying to say. I'd compare it to Wonder Shows or Tim and Eric or any of those types of programs. I felt like I was watching a 3D movie without the glasses, if you know what I'm saying. You know, give me the Aquabats pilot, some Domino's pizza, and whatever those two Littlest Pet Shop characters had going on. The second half of the pilot is an animated segment, and this had the same vibe. The reason this is here, and it's not all live action, is actually pretty interesting. According to this very well-researched video essay, when they pitched it around, most networks just wanted a cartoon, so they had half of it be live action, half animated, just in case they had to retool it. but we all know the story now. It was picked up and had its first season air on the Hub. The show is crazy, and it's such a fun time. The best episodes are the ones where they have at least some sort of character arc. Just cheese can be fun, but not stretch out to 22 minutes. You can be as campy as you want with our heroes, but you gotta have at least something. Like the most bare thing, like, oh, one of the Aquabats does this and gets the gang in trouble, he learns a lesson in the end. With that, they also vary it up a lot. Each episode has its own monster and some sort of unique practical effect they had to make, or an interesting sequence they put together. Like in the Westworld episode with the Bat Commander's song, the first episode with a bunch of effects to make people smaller or bigger, or in the Cobra Man one, where Jimmy the Robot's hand detaches and crawls around the floor. You have to be some sort of ingrate, yeah, that's the word I'm gonna use, if you can't appreciate a good practical effect. Just any sort of wacky heightened reality is really fun, and the show goes full on. It's so camp. Again, the monsters, effects, performances, the costumes, set designs are always something I gawk at. The show is a mix of inspiration, from live action shows from the 60s, 70s, stuff like Adam West Batman or Sid and Marty Krofft productions, mixed with Japanese tokusatsu, which Jacobs is a big fan of. Things like Ultraman, Kamen Rider, and Super Sentai, or Power Rangers if you're normal. I actually think there should be more Western shows that take influence from the genre. That style of costumed fight scenes and crazy editing has a lot of appeal, and there's something unique about it. But maybe I'm just saying that because the only thing we have like it in the West is just re-edited versions of the original with hip, diverse teens. They emphasize the band's physicality a lot in this. One episode from the second season has this whole sequence with a car chase and they're climbing on top of the tour bus and all that. This episode won awards for this, I'm not kidding. There's also a variety of locations I noticed. I appreciate how real all these settings feel. It makes the show grounded in a way where it balances out with everything else going on. A lot of these look like they were just shot in some park or out by the highway or in some crummy urban location. I compare it to when I'd watch Power Rangers Samurai, which was the newest one at the time, and all the settings were these pristine cities or whatever. Now, not the Aquabats, these people live in the real world. Like I said, the show is best when you've got the most minuscule LaCroix flavor of character to drive the silliness along. Each character has their own quirks that make them stand out a little, but those blue outfits are not doing them any favors. Going into this, after watching season 1 as a kid, I remember that there was the main one and a robot, and then nothing else. But you get used to them over time. There's no real recurring characters that I can remember, but they did get a lot of cool guest stars. Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo shows up as Jimmy's dad. Homestar Runner co-creator Matt Chapman is here in the Cobra Man episode, wearing a familiar mask.
Suspicious.
Gerard Way and other guy from MCR show up as part of the Anti-Bats from season 2. Mr. Lawrence, who worked as a writer, does narration for each episode in the same voice he did for the Mermaid Man episodes of SpongeBob, and he's even here playing a tiny character with antenna who steals burgers from a fast food restaurant. Oh yeah, and on all the TV tropes and IMDb and wikis, they don't mention this, but Tight Pants Body Rolls Lady plays a Were-Bigfoot in season 2. Now, if her involvement isn't a signifier of quality, I don't know what is. I don't know how Aquabats fans feel about the comparison, but I was waiting for They Might Be Giants to show up. I don't know, they're different genres, but I always kind of associated those two bands with each other. Hopefully there isn't an evil feud between the two fandoms. The show has at least one episode per song, and they're fun enough. The main theme was for sure the one that stuck out the most. One of the only other ones I remember was Burger Rain, and that's just because they play it on the TVs at Chuck E. Cheese's when I was a kid. Does anyone else remember that? When the Hub had Charles Entertainment Cheese in their pocket, they'd play that, they'd play something from Pound Puppies, I forget, and then it would be the winter wrap-up song from MLP. I mean, they'd eventually ditch that, but come on, somebody please remember what I'm talking about. Oh wait, what's that? It's a cartoon! Each episode has its own little animated segment. Season 1, they're all serialized, and you gotta watch every episode to get all the parts, or you could just watch the first and the last episode of Season 1. They do something neat with it I wouldn't want to spoil. It's fun how whenever the cartoons show up, they appear in some random thing, and when they cut back to the live action segment, they're like, oh, that was cool, because they clearly don't know what they're looking at. Like, you guys just saw the animated Aquabats drown, dude, come on. I like this anime style that they have with these tweens. It looks like some sort of internet thing, and it works for these shorter segments. It's expressive, and you can have these fun designs with enough motion for what the story calls for, but I don't know how it would have turned out if this were a full 11-minute cartoon, like what Cartoon Network would have done. Speaking of Cartoon Network, they also have this fake commercial segment every episode. It feels like something straight out of Mad or The Incredible Crew. Yeah, remember The Incredible Crew? I remember The Incredible Crew. The fake commercials are actually one of my favorite parts. It's fun seeing whatever wacky product they come up with. Season 2 would incorporate cartoons as well, but they would all be their own thing and not connected. I would totally recommend the Aquabats Super Show, even if you aren't a fan of the music. That was barely a factor in my enjoyment, but it's a nice plus. Just know what you are getting into, don't expect something super mind-blowing or even that unusual for its time. The effects are fun, but this isn't Hollywood level of production value we're dealing with. It's amazingly charming, but do be ready to see stuff like the whacked out digital effects, or in the Thing parody from Season 2, where they do that cartoon trope where someone hallucinates their friend as a steak, but it kinda looks like a piece of human waste. This screams early 2010s so random, but in that boy-flavored Cartoon Network way. But who's to say that isn't fun? Like, you put a song in your TV show called Burger Rain, you'd get laughed off the air today, but this was a different time. The Hub centered a big part of their branding around their superhero shows, most of which were just syndicated or acquired from other studios. The other big superhero property that they had exclusively, besides, the Aquabats, or Shizao, was Stan Lee's The Mighty Seven. For those who don't know, Stan Lee, yes, is attached to a lot of Marvel characters, but as a human person, he's still able to make his own stuff and put his name on it, separate from Marvel. Nothing to the level of what he's known for there, but there have been a lot of Stan Lee ventures based around his credits alone. Remember Stan Lee's reality show, where people compete to become superheroes? Or something? Trisha Paytas was on that, wow. The Mighty Seven features Stan Lee playing himself. After not having new ideas for a superhero comic, he decides to steal someone else's. Meets a group of aliens and tries to turn them into real-life superheroes. There's a shrinking amount of twists you can put on the generic superhero story, and they had an opportunity to do something at least a little special, but this is just so bland. And I get it, it's hard to make new superheroes and have them stick out, but they don't even try. All the characters besides Stan Lee look like generic characters made for a How to Draw Superheroes book you'd find at Michael's. The art style is nothing special and just looks like all those Marvel cartoons from the time, but with motion tweens, oh boy. I like how a lot of the action takes place in the dark too, so you can just show the characters in silhouette and not have to worry about how bad it looks. Anyways, I'm glad this at least wasn't a show. That's right, this was actually just a movie that either was supposed to be the pilot to a show, or eventually got split up into shorts. It's not available on streaming except in movie form, and the only other place I could find it was split up like this on some random YouTube channel that just puts up a bunch of cheapy Flash cartoons, including Superhero Kindergarten, which was the last project that Stan Lee was involved with. I know I've been harsh on this random weirdo movie, but I should put some respect on Stan Lee's name. Admittedly, he is the best part about this thing.
Wow, you are one fast woman, and hey, I mean that in a good way.
And there's all the things I want to talk about in detail. And there are some others, but nothing that would be worth my time to sit down and talk about in any way, like Secret Millionaires Club starring real-life billionaire Warren Buffett and a bunch of kids. Oh no, what's that? It's the jokes they're writing themselves! Teenage Fairy Tale Dropouts. I don't know if I've actually seen this one before, but it looks like one of those cartoons that nobody remembers but has an incredibly niche online fan base. Like, look at this guy with the emo hair, come on. One of the last shows that came on the Hub was Kid President, Declaration of Awesome. Listen, if you weren't around for Kid President, I don't know what to tell you. That's your homework for this video. Look up who Kid President is, because you just had to be there. I'm gonna be frank, this doesn't sound like an especially good lineup of shows to air on a network like this, but the Hub had acquired enough older shows to fill in the gaps. A pretty impressive catalog, actually. Older WB stuff, like what Margaret was doing with Fox Kids. Animaniacs, Tiny Toons, Batman and Superman Animated, Batman Beyond, the OG Goosebumps. They had a lot of sitcoms, stuff from the 80s that were probably meant to draw families in to watch. Fraggle Rock had a home there, 80s Transformers and G.I. Joe, but no old MLP, even though ponies were the biggest thing on the network. What makes these shows special is not that they aired them on the Hub, but the fact that they had so many creative promos, not just for their syndicated stuff, but for all their shows. The Hub promos are legendary. It really felt like there was thought going into them to make the channel feel like something grand. So many of these had crossovers between different shows, which I know isn't a new thing for this kind of network, but I think was really fun and helped to sell that coming together angle. In like the late 90s, where I think this thing first started, there was a certain level of technological prowess you needed to pull this kind of thing off, but in 2011, yeah, we can just edit Pound Puppies into an episode of Batman the Animated Series. No big deal. Besides that, there were so many other neat little crossovers crossovers. Strawberry Shortcake meets Transformers, Sing Along Saturday, where they just had everybody. And need I forget their magnum opus, the Hub Summer Pool Party. This 1-minute promo for the summer of 2013, where pretty much every mainstay show on the network has some sort of representation. Ponies, of course, LPS, Puppies, all the WB stuff, Marvel Superhero Squad, which they also aired on here, Dan vs, Aquabats, Shizao, The Haunting Hour. How can you not get excited? This is genuinely so cool. It must have been a pain to do too, because you had to find all these pieces you could crop out and put in here. Plus there are like so many tracking shots with these kids, and there's so much going on in the background too. Stuff going on behind the kids, part of the sets. Little Super Mario Logan is really excited about this.
It's this summer. We'll never get this summer back.
Besides that, they also had some neat little song, I think from 2012, sung by a few of the characters. I mean, nothing beats 4Kids Sings the National Anthem, but it's close. Transformers Prime, being one of the more well-known shows, have their own set of creative promos. Ask Megatron was a series where people would submit questions, and you'd have what I assume is Frank Welker answer them in character. I like that they chose really mundane stuff like his favorite Meryl Streep movie. It's really fun.
Which celebrity would you most like to vaporize?
I would most like to vaporize anyone on reality television, except for Donald Trump.
There was also another promo with Megatron transforming into a Care Bear, or one really early one with him at detention in a real-life high school. They loved having him in these situations. I mean, you know, it's the classic Chad Vader effect of having a serious evil character in a wacky situation. These were part of a Saturday action block called Haboom, which had its own separate branding, and bumpers with these two scientist guys doing wacky stuff. There's no ponies, so I don't really care about these. Pound Puppies didn't have anything spectacular, just some promos highlighting each character's different breed. The most notable besides that was one of the early commercials where Niblet says, "Secret but fun!" But you know those bronies, they thought it sounded like something else. I kid you not, that was actually a meme in the brony community. Of all the things they get hate for, why do we not talk about that? Niblet is innocent, okay? Dan vs had some great ones.
Breaking Dan!
No!
Law and Dan VSU!
I hate judges! Who pays you people?
But mainly Dan vs Pinkie Pie, which is iconic. They even did another, these two were inseparable. My Little Pony really was the darling of the network. A lot of these MLP promos went down in history. For April Fool's Day, they would do these ones like My Biggest Pony, with a whole new remix of the theme song. Another, there's this Cowboy Bebop, or Firefly, I don't know, the parody with Spike. Another crossover has the LPS characters with the ponies, with the main joke being that Blythe and Rainbow Dash sound exactly the same.
Hey ponies, check out my impression of Rainbow Dash. Hi, I'm Rainbow Dash. Nice try, Blythe.
Besides Blythe and Co., you also had some other legendary ones with ponies interacting with real people, like when they had the royal wedding and had Tori Spelling show up for a few bumpers, or in the season 3 finale, with 2013 Miss America winner Mallory Hagan hosting alongside Twilight and friends.
Twilight Sparkle, you really did prove that friendship is magic.
Thanks, Miss America.
There's another promo that's a parody of the original iPhone ads, but with the pony characters, but you know. I think we're forgetting the GOAT, the OG. An adaptation of California Girls, sung by Pinkie Pie about the show. It does not get much better than this. This also had one of, if not the first brony shoutout from an official thing, because this was really early in the show's run.
Hey there.
Ponies also had their own Q&A, but I gotta say, it's not as fun as Ask Megatron. Mostly because the questions are really bland, and half the time they won't even give a real answer. The live-action kids will be like, "Fluttershy, what's your favorite animal?" And Fluttershy will be like, "I like them all." At least Megatron had the gall to say he wouldn't vaporize Donald Trump. The last big crossover things were these 30-second holiday special promos, and some just for individual shows. What's really impressive is the amount of people they would get to reprise their role for some of these promos. Like, yeah, you've got current show actors, Curtis Armstrong did some Dan vs promos, John Delancey had some with MLP, but they got the original voices for the Animaniacs back, characters from Fraggle Rock come back from when they had their 35th anniversary Fraggle Anniversary Marathon, and they even got Alf back from his job at the Food Network kitchen with Paula Deen. The bumpers with all their different eras are a real treat too. Huge shout out to the official Hub YouTube channel for uploading most of these. Call me Bob Chandler, because do you realize how much lost media you guys prevented by putting these out there when you did? You usually never see networks do this, but the Hub knew. They knew. As for certain eras of bumpers, I know this green grass looking thing and the plain color coming up next screens should be lauded for being the OG, but I like the era that came after it, from late 2011 to 2012. You have this neon text, that same hub font, but I don't know, it tickles my fancy a lot more. I like the aesthetic. I don't know if it's Frutiger Aero, Frutiger Metro, just whatever aesthetic they had on the 2008 version of Sorry. I won't discount the summer 2011 bumpers though, because those are a museum of early 2010s aesthetics in their own right, with these notebook doodly designs. In late 2012, early 2013, they introduced the slogan,
"It could happen only on the hub,"
which didn't catch on, but you do see in a lot of these bumpers. They started having these bumpers with these real-life families, and this is where it started to go downhill. Previous branding looked relatively expensive to make, like those early CGI bumpers are pretty impressive, especially compared to later around 2014, with just these blank colors. I think around here is when the branding stopped trying to be cool and started trying to appeal more to families. And they worked. These aren't cool, these are really boring. There was clearly some shift going on. Along with these, it was when they'd stopped doing the more creative bumpers and promos. Before we get into that, I think we need to talk about one more aspect of the hub. The website. Like any self-respecting kids channel, the hub boasted its own website, where kids, with parents' permission, could go on and play games, watch videos, and even read up on some of their favorite hub shows. If you've been on any of those websites, it's scarily similar. You've got your navigation bar with a bunch of random character JPEGs you can sort through, show pages with clips and lay epic flash games, and you can't forget those character profiles. The Dan Vs. one has all the main characters, but for some reason includes this random incidental hippie character who shows up. Good thing we have all the facts about the classic character Crunchy. I can't talk about the website and not talk about the games. Again, My Little Pony was the sweetheart, having all these different flash games. Racing is Magic? Absolute banger. I talked more about those in my MLP Games video. If you want to play any of these from this website, there's no doubt they'd be on Blue Maxima's Flashpoint, a program that archives a ton, and I mean a ton of flash games. Finally, we can play Dan Vs. this game. Godspeed. There would also be certain events that would incorporate things from the website into the show. Viewers could vote on the name of this one Pound Puppies character, and there was another Pound Puppies poll later on, which was more of a sweepstakes where you enter pictures of your dog. Ask Megatron had online submitted questions, and MLP had their own online voting events. Holiday Season 2011, they held the Naughty or Nice vote, where characters from each show would be voted naughtiest or nicest. Discord and Pinkie Pie won respectively, out of a large bracket of characters. Discord beat out Mark Hamill's Joker, really shows you how powerful those bronies were. In summer of 2013, leading up to the premiere of the first Equestria Girls movie, fans could vote online for their favorite pony. Each main 6 member would have their own campaign videos play on the channel throughout, and in August of that year, Fluttershy won, and that morning they just played a bunch of Fluttershy episodes. The most obscure side of the hub website I found was called Club Hub, this page where you'd get virtual cash by playing games, including that awful Welcome to Ponyville game. Now I get what the point of that was. You could also get badges, which reminds me of the old Cartoon Network website, and you had your own little room you could decorate with PNGs and stuff. Looking up anything for Club Hub beyond these 2 commercials gives you absolutely nothing. It definitely wasn't popular because on later versions of the Hub website they seem to have completely done away with it. There was also the Hub app. This was similar to others like the Nick or the old Cartoon Network app, where it was the same idea as a website, just on its own proprietary app. At the gates, there were reports that the Hub network might not have been worth as much as Hasbro and Discovery thought. I don't want to make any bold claims without knowing the facts behind the scenes. The Hub was a force in early 2010s for kids TV, but not one to be reckoned with. All I can say about the supposed failure is really speculation. Okay, when I was a kid, you had 3 big cable networks: Cartoon Network, Disney Channel, and Nickelodeon. Cartoon Network was Channel 52, Nick was 55, and Disney was 67. The Hub network, along with Disney XD and T-Nick and Boomerang and all those, were somewhere around Channel 314. Not sure if that was the situation for a lot of people, or if a lot of people just didn't have the Hub bundled in with their family's cable packages, but it wasn't the first thing I was watching after school. Nobody on the playground was quoting Pound Puppies or The Haunting Hour. Multiple comment sections I found from around 2014 also mentioned the Hub's lack of newer programming, past that initial hype. My Little Pony was a draw for people, for sure, but it seems a lot of people didn't have anything to keep them there. Compare their programming to something like Cartoon Network, which was going through kind of a renaissance announced at the time, and was probably drawing a lot of eyes away from the hub. They had their big hitters in 2010, but they just kept putting resources into shows that stood alongside those and kept people watching. There also could have been the issue of casting too wide a net. Like, I'm sorry, but airing Care Bears on the same network as Dan Vs. with very little delineation between different blocks might get some people confused. Later on, one of the Transformers executives would say something about the hub's programming being mostly targeted at girls, and while I don't think that's entirely true, being known as the My Little Pony channel might have been a turnaway for certain audiences that would have liked something like a Dan Vs. or Aquabats. The hub had interesting branding, some would say, I mean, that's what I would say, but that couldn't save it. In June 2014, Margaret Lesh stepped down from her position as CEO. A while later, the news came that the channel that's now the hub would be rebranded into Discovery Family. In my personal opinion, and my speculation, the writing was on the wall for this with some of the hub's later branding, even back when they went all in on the making family fun stuff. The way I think it happened is that if this channel was going to be under the Discovery umbrella and they wanted it to be a Watch Together channel, why not just get rid of all the stuff in between and make it just that? Air Cake Boss and Extreme Couponing so we don't have to spend money on all these cartoons. But you know, keep ponies though, those are making us some serious cash. You also need to think about how by 2014 less and less people were watching cable in general. Viewership was going to get lower, regardless of if the shows were good or if they were drawing people in. Discovery would go from a 50% in the network to 60%, with Hasbro having less influence on daily programming. The changeover to Discovery would also lead to a lot of projects getting cancelled. Dan Vs. Season 4, more Aquabats. Apparently there was going to be a series based on the Kiss Hello Kitty line of Sanrio products. Yeah, like the Rock Band. I can only imagine what that would have been like. But that was taken off. The newest Transformers series, Robots in Disguise, would move over to Cartoon Network instead of airing on Discovery. And My Little Pony would march on and be a mainstay on Discovery Family, airing new episodes up until 2019. Littlest Pet Shop would have a reboot in 2018 to coincide with a new wave of toys, but it wasn't the 2012 series. Most hub shows would live on through these reboots, or like Dan Vs. become a cult classic among animation fans. Pound Puppies would have an embarrassing low-budget reboot of the original toy line, and the Aquabats would continue too, with an equally as embarrassing YouTube show. Contracts between Discovery and Hasbro are iffy. Multiple sources tell me that they were meant to expire back in 2021, but I'm not going to say for sure. Nowadays, Hasbro is all about that, what do they call it? They're distribution agnostic now. Oh. Hasbro isn't focused on a single platform anymore. They can put stuff based on their IPs out on cable networks, streaming, YouTube, and in theaters, etc. Part of me thinks that the whole hub thing has something to do with how they operate nowadays. Discovery Communications and its CEO David Zaslav would continue to operate as usual, and never got into any controversy ever again. The Hub Network is truly a media time capsule, with shows that feel like they only could have come out at that time, and branding that reeks of the aesthetics of back then. It only ran from 2010 to 2014, only around to see the first half of the 2010s, and you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. When you think of the Hub, besides the one network that MLP used to air on, you think of that specific era. It's one of those things where you realize you should have appreciated it while it was still around. Looking at these old promos, you have this overwhelming feeling that they were trying to make this work, against all odds. Of course you need to take that step back into reality, and realize that a bunch of cartoon characters superimposed onto some kids in a pool means nothing, and is just there to sell you stuff. But you see that, and you feel like it's the little network that could. That ragtag group of weird shows that nobody wanted. And My Little Pony. Bill Shaker YT, Quinamon, Lula, Jaina Shadows, Zozas Amaze, Nublet67, Trevor, Mario Trombet Patron, Dodie Gore, Byron Ritchie, One Pridgiboo, HBM, Scambuli, as Safrani, Hoodie, Nana, Kaylee Lahota, Knife Girl, Technicolor, Jack Getchman, Olive, SR Nano, Gator Kitty, Bad Bessie, and Marshmallow.